I knew what they'd call me before the word ever left my sister's lips. Standing in my childhood living room, watching my family judge my life like it was evidence of complete failure, I felt the familiar weight of their disappointment crushing down on me. They never expected me to have proof. They never expected Marcus to walk through that door. They never expected the truth about what I'd really accomplished. And that's exactly why this Christmas was about to change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The December wind bit at my cheeks as I stood on the familiar front porch of my childhood home. My laptop bag slung over my shoulder and a small wrapped gift tucked under my arm. At 28, I still felt like that insecure teenager every time I came back here. The house looked exactly the same, red brick colonial with white shutters, perfectly manicured lawn now dusted with snow, and my mother's prized holiday wreath hanging on the dark green door. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs as I tried to calm the anxiety already building in my chest. It had been 6 months since I'd last visited. 6 months since the last family gathering that had ended with me leaving early, stung by yet another round of criticism, disguised as concern for my future. The door swung open before I could knock, revealing my mother Carmen's perfectly styled silver hair and her practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Zara, sweetheart," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "You made it. I was starting to worry with the snow." "Hi, Mom," I forced warmth into my voice, stepping into the entryway that smelled of pine candles and my mother's signature vanilla perfume. "Your sister's already here with the kids," Mom said, hanging my coat in the hall closet. "They've been asking about Aunt Zara all morning." At least someone was excited to see me. Brooke's kids, Ivy and Owen, were the bright spots in these family gatherings, too young yet to have absorbed their parents' judgment about my life choices. I followed Mom into the living room where the scene was exactly what I had expected. Brooke sat elegantly on the cream-colored sofa, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon, wearing what I was sure was a designer sweater in Christmas red. She looked like she'd stepped out of a holiday catalog. Her husband, Nathan, sat beside her scrolling through his phone while keeping one eye on their children who were quietly building with expensive wooden blocks near the fireplace. "Well, look who finally graced us with their presents," Brooke said, standing to give me a brief, obligatory hug. Her perfume was different from Mom's, something floral and expensive that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. "Hey, Brooke, Nathan," I nodded toward my brother-in-law, who looked up long enough to give me a polite wave before returning to his phone. "Aunt Sarah!" 7-year-old Ivy launched herself at me with genuine enthusiasm, wrapping her small arms around my waist. 5-year-old Owen was more cautious until I crouched down to his level. "Hey, you two! You've gotten so big since I saw you last." I hugged them both, grateful for their uncomplicated affection. "Did you bring us presents?" Owen asked with the directness only children possess. "Owen," Brooke scolded, "that's not polite." "It's okay," I laughed, pulling 2 small wrapped gifts from my bag. "I might have something for you guys." As the kids tore into their gifts, art supplies for Ivy, who loved to draw, and a science kit for Owen, I caught the look that passed between Brooke and Mom. It was subtle, but I'd learned to read their silent communications over the years. The look said, "Here she goes again, trying to buy their affection because she doesn't have kids of her own." "Dad in his office?" I asked, trying to ignore the familiar sting. "Conference call with Tokyo," Mom replied. "He should be done soon. You know how important his work is." The emphasis on his work was not lost on me. In my family, important work meant corporate law, like Dad's successful practice, or pharmaceutical sales, like Brooke's management position. Creative work, digital marketing, content strategy, what I did for a living, was seen as playing on computers, not real work. "Zara, come sit." Brooke patted the space beside her on the sofa. "Tell us what you've been up to. Still doing that computer thing?" I settled into the armchair across from them, noting that she had deliberately made space between us on the sofa, but had positioned herself so I was separated, facing them like I was being interviewed. "Digital marketing and content strategy," I corrected gently. "Yes, still doing that." "And how is that going for you?" Mom asked, settling into her own chair with a cup of coffee. "Are you making enough to be comfortable?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. They'd been asking variations of this same question for 3 years, ever since I left my corporate communications job to freelance and eventually join a startup agency.
I'm doing well, actually. Really well. I tried to inject confidence into my voice, but even to my own ears, it sounded defensive. Brooke exchanged another look with Mom. Well, that's good. I suppose everyone defines doing well differently. What does that mean? I asked, though I knew I shouldn't take the bait. Nothing, sweetie, Mom interjected quickly. We just worry about your stability, your future. At your age, Brooke was already married with a house and a clear career path. Not everyone wants the same things, Mom. Of course not, Brooke said, her voice dripping with false understanding. Some people prefer the freedom of not having real responsibilities. The words stung because they were designed to do so. Brooke had perfected this particular skill over the years, delivering insults wrapped in concern, criticism disguised as caring. I have plenty of responsibilities, I said evenly. I manage social media campaigns for major brands, develop content strategies that generate millions in revenue. And oh, social media. Nathan looked up from his phone for the first time, chuckling. So you post pictures on Instagram for a living. It's significantly more complex than that. I'm sure it is, Brooke said in the tone you'd use with a child explaining their imaginary friend. But what happens when you get older, when you want to settle down, start a family? You can't build a life on posting things online. Before I could respond, my father's voice boomed from the hallway. Victor Mitchell had always been a commanding presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the kind of deep voice that made juries listen when he spoke in courtroom. "There, my girl," he said, entering the living room with his arms outstretched. His hug was genuine, warmer than Mom's or Brooke's greetings, but even he held me at arm's length afterwards, studying my face with the same analytical expression he probably used on witnesses. "You look tired, honey. This work of yours isn't wearing you down, is it?" And there it was. Even his concern came wrapped in doubt about my choices. "I'm fine, Dad, just busy with a big campaign launch." "Campaign launch," he repeated slowly, as if testing how the words tasted. "And this is for... It's for a sustainable fashion brand. We're launching their holiday collection with an integrated digital strategy across 5 platforms." Dad nodded politely, but I could see in his eyes that he had no idea what I just said, and more importantly, that he didn't think it mattered enough to learn. "Well," he settled into his leather recliner, "as long as you're happy." The phrase, "as long as you're happy," had become their family code for, "We think you're making terrible decisions, but we're too polite to say so directly." "Actually," Brooke said, brightening as if she just remembered something delightful, "I have some exciting news to share. Nathan got promoted to senior director, and we just put an offer in on that house in Riverside Estates, the one with the 4 bedrooms and the 3-car garage." The family erupted in congratulations. Mom clasped her hands together in delight, Dad nodded approvingly, and even the kids looked up from their toys to soak in the positive energy directed at their parents. "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want my sister to fail, but I also felt the familiar pang of being the family disappointment, the one whose achievements never seemed worth celebrating. "What about you, Zara?" Mom asked, turning her attention back to me with what I now recognized as pity. "Any prospects on the horizon? Dating anyone special?" "I'm seeing someone, actually. Ryan. He's a graphic designer." "A graphic designer," Dad repeated with the same tone he'd used for campaign launch. "Another creative type." "Is it serious?" Brooke asked, but the way she said it suggested she hoped it wasn't. "We've been together 8 months. It's going really well." 8 months, Mom mused. "That's nice, dear, though at your age, you probably shouldn't wait too long to figure out if it's going anywhere." The subtext was clear. You're running out of time to have the life we approve of. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket and gratefully pulled it out, hoping for a distraction. It was a text from Ryan. "How's the family interrogation going? Remember what we practiced. You're successful, you're happy, and you don't need their approval. Love you." The message made me smile genuinely for the first time since I'd arrived. "Work?" Dad asked, noticing my phone. No, just Ryan checking in. On Christmas Eve? How romantic. I was saved from having to respond by the sound of the front door opening and voices in the hallway. Aunt Diane and Uncle Kenneth had arrived, along with their adult son Marcus. Wait, no, different Marcus. This was my cousin Marcus, not my boss. I felt a strange flutter of disappointment that caught me off guard.
The living room quickly filled with more family members, more hugs, more questions about my life that felt like gentle interrogations. Aunt Diane, Mom's younger sister, had always been kinder to me than the immediate family, but even she looked at me with a mixture of fondness and concern. "Zara, sweetheart, you look wonderful," she said, squeezing my hands. "Still doing your computer work?" "Digital marketing," I corrected automatically. "Oh, yes, that's right. How modern. I don't understand any of it, but I'm sure you're very good at whatever it is you do." Uncle Kenneth clapped me on the shoulder. "The important thing is that you're following your passion, right? Even if it doesn't pay the bills." "It does pay the bills, actually." Of course," he said, already turning away to congratulate Brooke and Nathan on their house purchase and promotion. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself relegated to the edges of conversations, nodding and smiling while my family discussed real estate values, retirement planning, school districts, and other markers of conventional success. Every attempt I made to contribute was met with polite smiles and quick subject changes. When I mentioned landing a major client, Brooke said, "That's nice, but what happens when the contract ends?" When I talked about a campaign that had generated $2 million in sales for a client, Dad asked, "But what's your piece of that? Are you getting real equity or just a paycheck?" When I showed them a video ad I'd created that had gone viral, Mom squinted at my phone screen and said, "It's very colorful. I'm sure young people like that sort of thing." By the time we sat down for Christmas Eve dinner, I felt like I'd been death by a thousand cuts, each comment small enough to seem harmless, but together they formed a clear message. Your life is not enough. You are not enough. The dining room table was set with Mom's finest china, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier above. I found myself seated between Aunt Diane and my cousin Marcus, directly across from Brooke and Nathan. It felt like being positioned for maximum observation and judgment. As we passed dishes around the table, Mom's famous honey-glazed ham, roasted vegetables, her signature sweet potato casserole, the conversation naturally turned to accomplishments and plans for the new year. Brooke dominated the discussion, detailing Nathan's promotion, their house hunting adventure, and their carefully planned timeline for expanding their family. Everyone listened with rapt attention, asking follow-up questions and offering advice. "You two have really built something beautiful together," Mom said, beaming at Brooke and Nathan. "A stable foundation for your future." "That's what happens when you make smart choices early," Dad added, raising his wine glass. "Build your career first, find the right partner, establish financial security, then start a family. That's how you do it right." I felt all eyes turned to me, waiting for my response to this implicit criticism of my choices. But before I could speak, Brooke leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, not everyone wants that kind of responsibility," she said sweetly. "Some people prefer to just play around with their hobbies and see what happens." The word hobbies hit me like a slap. 3 years of building my career, of working 18-hour days, of learning new platforms and strategies, of proving myself in client meeting after client meeting, and my own sister reduced it all to playing around with hobbies? "My work isn't a hobby," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, of course not. I just meant that it's nice you get to do something you enjoy, even if it's not, you know, traditional." "What Brooke means," Nathan chimed in, "is that it's great you're having fun with it, but what's your long-term plan? You can't Instagram your way to retirement." Laughter rippled around the table. Even Uncle Kenneth chuckled, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation.
I'm not just Instagramming, I said, my voice rising slightly. I develop comprehensive digital strategies, manage multi-million-dollar advertising budgets, analyze consumer data. Zara, Mom interrupted gently, we're not attacking you. We just want to make sure you're thinking practically about your future. But it felt like an attack. It felt like it always did, like my family had collectively decided that my choices were fundamentally wrong and they were going to keep chipping away at my confidence until I admitted defeat and crawled back to the kind of life they understood. I looked around the table at their faces, concerned, pitying, superior. These people who claimed to love me but had never once asked to understand what I actually did for work, who had never celebrated a single one of my achievements, who treated my passion like a phase I'd eventually outgrow. The worst part was that deep down, a small voice wondered if they were right. Maybe I was just playing around. Maybe my work didn't matter. Maybe I was fooling myself about my success. That's when my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. It was from Marcus Kane, my boss and the founder of our agency. Emergency client meeting moved to tonight. Can you be available? This could be the big break we've been waiting for. I stared at the message, my heart racing. Marcus never worked on Christmas Eve unless something massive was happening, and he'd never texted me during family time unless it was truly urgent. But how could I explain this to my family? How could I make them understand that this wasn't just work, it was the opportunity that could change everything? I was about to find out that I wouldn't have to explain anything at all.
I excused myself from the dinner table, claiming I needed to use the restroom, but really I needed a moment to process Marcus's text and figure out how to respond. Standing in the hallway bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The same mirror where I'd practiced confidence speeches as a teenager, where I'd given myself pep talks before job interviews, where I'd cried after particularly brutal family gatherings. The woman looking back at me now seemed tired, defeated. My carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the stress lines around my eyes, and my holiday sweater, chosen specifically because it was appropriate for family dinner, suddenly felt like a costume I was wearing to play a role I'd never wanted. I typed and deleted several responses to Marcus's text before settling on, I'm with family right now, but I can step away if it's urgent. What's happening? His response came immediately. Silverton Industries wants to sign. Tonight. They're flying back to London tomorrow and want to finalize everything before they leave. This is the account we've been chasing for 6 months, Zara. The one that changes everything. My heart stopped. Silverton Industries was one of the biggest luxury brands in the world, with a global marketing budget that could single-handedly transform our small agency into a major player. We'd been courting them since June, and I'd personally crafted 3 different campaign proposals that Marcus had called brilliant and exactly what they need. But they were notoriously demanding, perfectionist, and had a reputation for canceling deals at the last minute if even the smallest detail didn't meet their standards. If Marcus was texting me on Christmas Eve, it meant they wanted to see the person behind the campaigns. Me. I typed back, where and when? The Meridian Hotel, downtown, 9 p.m. Zara, I need you there. You're the one who understands their brand identity better than anyone. This meeting could secure all our futures. I checked the time. It was 7:15 p.m. I could make it if I left within the hour, but explaining this to my family would be impossible. They'd see it as just another example of my inability to prioritize real relationships over my computer work. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had moved on to vacation plans. Brooke was describing their upcoming trip to Aspen, complete with ski lessons for the kids and spa treatments for herself. 2 weeks in the mountains, she sighed contentedly. No phones, no work, just family time and fresh air. That's what really matters, making memories with the people you love. The implication was clear. Unlike some people who prioritize work over family. That sounds wonderful, I said, sliding back into my seat.
My phone felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. "What about you, Zara?" Aunt Diane asked kindly. "Any vacation plans for the new year?" "I'm hoping to travel more, actually. Maybe Europe, if this new project—" "Europe!" Mom clasped her hands together. "How exciting! A little soul-searching trip? Sometimes a change of scenery helps you figure out what you really want in life." Again, the subtext. Maybe you'll finally realize your current life isn't working. It would actually be work-related, I clarified. Potentially opening an international branch of our agency. "International branch?" Uncle Kenneth laughed. "How many people work at this agency of yours?" 12 full-time employees, plus freelancers and contractors. 12 people? He repeated, as if I had said 12 hamsters. Well, I suppose everyone has to start somewhere. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "The client specifically asked for you by name. They want to meet the strategic mind behind the campaigns. This is your moment, Zara." My heart raced. They had asked for me specifically. Me, not Marcus, not the account manager, but me. The girl my family thought was playing around with hobbies was being personally requested by one of the world's most prestigious brands. "Everything all right, dear?" Mom asked, noticing my distraction. "You seem agitated?" "Just work stuff," I mumbled, putting my phone face down on the table. "On Christmas?" Dad frowned disapprovingly. "Whatever happened to work-life balance? In my day, when you left the office, you left the work behind." "Digital marketing doesn't really work that way," I tried to explain. "Social media doesn't take holidays, and global clients are in different time zones." "That's exactly the problem," Nathan interrupted, gesturing with his fork. "You're enslaved to technology, always on call, always stressed. That's not sustainable." "Neither is posting pictures for a living," Brooke added with a laugh that cut deep. I felt something snap inside me. I don't post pictures for a living. I create comprehensive marketing strategies that help businesses reach their target audiences and drive revenue growth. I analyze consumer behavior, develop brand positioning, coordinate multi-platform campaigns. "Zara," Mom said softly, the way she used to when I was a child having a tantrum, "we understand you work very hard at what you do. We just worry that you're not building toward anything solid, anything lasting." "What your mother means," Dad said, leaning forward with his lawyer voice, "is that we don't see a clear path forward. No pension, no job security, no traditional markers of success. How do you even measure if you're doing well?"
The question hung in the air like a challenge. How could I explain metrics like engagement rates, conversion percentages, brand awareness lift, and return on ad spend to people who measured success in salary figures, benefits packages, and corner offices? "I measure success by results," I said carefully, "by helping my clients achieve their goals and grow their businesses." "But what about your goals?" Brooke asked, and for a moment her voice sounded genuinely curious rather than critical. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years? What's your exit strategy?" The questions she was asking weren't unfair, but the way she asked them, like she already knew my answers would be inadequate, made them feel like attacks. "I see myself continuing to grow in the industry, maybe starting my own agency eventually, or taking on bigger international clients." "But what if the industry changes?" Uncle Kenneth interjected. "What if social media becomes obsolete? What if artificial intelligence takes over? You need backup plans, sweetheart. Multiple income streams, real estate, investments." "The digital marketing industry isn't going anywhere," I protested. "If anything, it's growing exponentially. Companies are spending more on digital advertising every year." "For now," Dad said ominously, "but markets change. Industries disappear overnight. Remember when everyone thought travel agents would never be replaced? When people said bookstores were recession-proof?" My phone buzzed again, and this time I couldn't help but glance at it. Marcus had sent another message. They want to see the presentation deck you created for the luxury market analysis, the one with the consumer psychology breakdown. They're specifically interested in your insights on Gen Z luxury purchasing behaviors. They wanted to see my work, my analysis, my insights. The presentation I'd spent weeks researching and developing, diving deep into consumer psychology and behavioral data to understand how younger generations approached luxury purchases differently than previous generations. That presentation had been praised by every client who'd seen it. One CEO had called it revolutionary thinking, and another had said it perfectly captured the zeitgeist of modern luxury consumption. But my family would never understand the significance of that kind of professional recognition. You know what I think? Brooke said, cutting through my thoughts. I think you're afraid of commitment to a real career, to a serious relationship, to building something permanent. It's easier to float from project to project, client to client, because then you never have to really succeed or really fail. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd accomplished, all the late nights and weekends I'd worked, all the clients I'd helped build their businesses from the ground up, my own sister saw me as someone afraid of commitment. That's not... She held up her hand. I'm not judging you, Zara. I understand the appeal of that lifestyle when you're young. But at some point, you have to grow up. You have to choose stability over excitement, security over adventure. That's what adults do. The table fell silent. Even the kids, who had been quietly playing with their dessert, seemed to sense the tension in the room. Maybe, I said slowly, my definition of growing up is different from yours. What does that mean? Mom asked. Maybe growing up means having the courage to pursue what you're passionate about, even when other people don't understand it. Maybe it means building something you believe in instead of settling for something that just pays well. Dad set down his coffee cup with a clink that seemed louder than it should have been. Passion is a luxury, Zara. Something you indulge after you've secured your foundation. You can't eat passion. You can't retire on dreams. But you can't live without them either. Another buzz from my phone. This time, Marcus had sent a photo, the Silverton Industries logo on a contract with the signature line at the bottom and a note, "This could be signed tonight if we play our cards right. I need my best strategist there, please." I stared at the image, my pulse quickening. This was it. The opportunity I'd been working toward for years. The validation that my work mattered, that my insights had value, that I wasn't just playing around with hobbies. But looking around the table at my family's expectant faces, I realized that even if I landed the biggest client in the agency's history, even if this meeting launched my career into the stratosphere, they still wouldn't understand. They'd still see it as me choosing work over family, still think I was avoiding real life. "Everything okay?" Aunt Diane asked gently. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at my phone again, then at my family, then back at my phone. In a few hours, I could be sitting across from executives who valued my expertise, who had specifically requested my presence, who saw my work as essential to their success. Or I could stay here, enduring subtle digs about my career choices and life decisions, feeling smaller and more inadequate with each passing hour. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I need to step out for a work call. There's a situation that requires my immediate attention." Brooks sighed dramatically. "Seriously? On Christmas Eve? Can't it wait until Monday?" "No," I said, standing up from the table. "It can't wait. Some opportunities only come once." As I headed toward the hallway, I heard Dad mutter to Mom, "This is exactly what we're talking about. No boundaries, no priorities. How is she supposed to build a real life if she can't even make it through one family dinner without working?" I paused in the doorway, my hand on my phone, Marcus's messages still glowing on the screen. For a moment, I considered turning around, sitting back down, and proving to them that I could put family first. But then I thought about the presentation they wanted to see, about the months of research and strategy development that had gone into it, about the executives who had specifically asked for me by name. I thought about all the times I diminished my own accomplishments to make my family more comfortable, all the opportunities I downplayed, all the success I'd hidden because it didn't fit their definition of what mattered. Not tonight. Tonight, I was going to choose myself. But first, I had to make it through the next hour without revealing what was really at stake. I stepped into the hallway and called Marcus, keeping my voice low so the family couldn't overhear from the dining room. "Thank God," he answered on the first ring. "Tell me you can make it tonight." "I'm trying to figure out how," I whispered. "I'm at my family's Christmas Eve dinner, and if I leave now—" "Zara, listen to me," Marcus interrupted, his voice intense but controlled. "James Silverton himself is flying in from London. He'll be at this meeting. Do you understand what that means?" My breath caught. James Silverton, the CEO and founder of Silverton Industries, was notoriously reclusive. He rarely took meetings personally, preferring to delegate to his executive team. If he was coming to this meeting, it meant they were serious about signing with us. "He specifically mentioned your luxury market analysis," Marcus continued. "He said it was the first time anyone had accurately captured their brand's position in the evolving luxury landscape. He wants to meet the person who gets it at such a fundamental level." I leaned against the hallway wall, my mind racing. This was beyond anything I dared to hope for. To have someone of James Silverton's caliber recognize my work, to want to meet me personally, it was career-defining. "What time do you need me there?" I asked. 9 p.m. sharp. The meeting's at the Meridian Hotel Penthouse Conference Room. Zara, I can't overstate how important this is. This contract would triple our revenue. It would put us on the map internationally. "I understand. I'll be there." "Are you sure? Because if you can't commit fully to this, I need to know now. They're expecting our A-team, and you're the star of that team." The confidence in his voice, the way he called me the star, sent a rush of validation through me that my family had never provided. Here was someone who valued my work, who saw my potential, who believed in my abilities without qualification. "I said I'll be there, Marcus. I won't let you down." "I know you won't. That's why you're the best strategist I've ever worked with." After hanging up, I stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to compose myself. Through the dining room doorway, I could hear my family's conversation continuing without missing a beat, as if my absence hadn't even been noticed. Brooke was telling a story about Nathan's company Christmas Eve party, describing the elegant venue and the networking opportunities. It's so important to be seen at these industry events. You never know who you might meet, what doors might open. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here they were discussing the importance of professional networking and seizing opportunities, while I was about to walk away from the biggest opportunity of my career because they expected me to prioritize their traditional family gathering over my computer work. When I returned to the table, Mom immediately noticed my expression. "Is everything all right, dear? You look stressed." "Just work stuff," I repeated, taking a sip of my wine to buy myself time to think. "What kind of work emergency could possibly happen on Christmas Eve?" Dad asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer would be frivolous. I considered telling them the truth, that I was being personally requested by one of the world's most successful CEOs, that this meeting could transform my career, that everything I'd been working toward for years was culminating in the next few hours. But I knew how they'd react. They'd find ways to diminish it, to poke holes in the opportunity, to make me doubt myself. "A client is having some issues with their campaign launch," I said instead, keeping it vague. "On Christmas Eve?" Brooke shook her head in disbelief. "What kind of client expects you to work on a holiday? That sounds like a red flag to me." "It's an international client," I explained. "Different time zones, different holidays." "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about," Nathan jumped in. "No work-life balance, no respect for your personal time."
In corporate, we have policies about after-hours communication, boundaries. Digital marketing is different. Different or dysfunctional, Dad asked pointedly. Because from where I sit, it sounds like you're being taken advantage of. Uncle Kenneth nodded sagely. In my day, if a boss called you at home during family time, you'd tell him to call back Monday morning. Respect is earned, not given. I felt my frustration building. Here I was about to attend the most important meeting of my professional life, and they were framing it as me being exploited rather than recognized for my expertise. Sometimes opportunities don't wait for convenient timing, I said carefully. Opportunities, Brooke repeated with a slight laugh. Is that what we're calling it now? The dismissive tone in her voice made my chest tighten. Even when I tried to frame my work in terms they might understand, they found ways to belittle it. Actually, it is an opportunity, I said, my voice gaining strength. A significant one. How significant can it be if they're calling you at the last minute on Christmas Eve? Mom asked. Sounds like more poor planning to me. I looked around the table at their faces, skeptical, pitying, superior. These people who claimed to love me had never once asked genuine questions about my work, never tried to understand what I did or why it mattered to me. They simply decided that because it didn't fit their definition of traditional success, it must be frivolous.
You know what? I said, setting down my napkin. I need to handle this. It'll just take an hour or two. You're leaving? Mom's voice rose in disappointment. On Christmas Eve? Zara, we planned this whole evening around family time. I'm not leaving permanently. I just need to step out for a work meeting. A work meeting, Dad repeated slowly, on Christmas Eve, at 8 o'clock at night? When he said it like that, it did sound unreasonable, but he didn't understand the stakes, the importance, the validation that this meeting represented. Some things are time-sensitive, I said. More time-sensitive than family? Brooke asked, and there was genuine hurt in her voice that caught me off guard. For a moment, I wavered. Despite all their criticism and judgment, they were my family. This was Christmas Eve, a time for togetherness and tradition. Maybe I was being selfish, choosing career over family. But then I remembered the way they'd talked about my work throughout the evening, as if it were a phase, a hobby, something I'd eventually outgrow when I got serious about life. I remembered years of similar gatherings where my achievements were minimized and my choices questioned. Sometimes, I said quietly, family means supporting each other's dreams, even when you don't understand them. We do support you, Mom protested. We just want you to be realistic about what? About lowering my expectations? About settling for less because it's safer? About giving up on what I'm passionate about because it makes you uncomfortable? The room fell silent. Even the kids stopped playing, sensing the tension between the adults. Unbelievable, Brooke muttered. Just unbelievable. Zara, please, whatever this is, surely it can wait. It's Christmas Eve. We're family. Family supports each other, I said, grabbing my purse from the counter. Family celebrates each other's successes instead of constantly questioning them. Success? Nathan laughed. How is that success? You're ditching Christmas dinner for a work call. How is that success? I paused in the doorway, looking back at them all. You know what? You're right. This is exactly the choice that defines success, and I'm choosing to bet on myself instead of shrinking to make you comfortable. As I headed toward the front door, I heard Dad call after me. This is exactly why your life is so unstable, Zara. You can't tell the difference between opportunity and obligation. But I kept walking, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own definition of what mattered, regardless of what my family thought. I had no idea that within the next few hours, they'd finally understand exactly how wrong they had been about everything. I drove to the Meridian Hotel with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, adrenaline and anxiety coursing through my system in equal measure. The city streets were unusually quiet for a Friday night, most families tucked away in their homes, celebrating Christmas Eve together, exactly where my family thought I should be. But as I pulled into the hotel's valet parking, I felt a surge of determination. This was my moment. Everything I'd worked for, every late night spent perfecting campaigns, every client presentation where I'd had to prove my worth, it had all led to this. The Meridian's lobby was elegantly decorated for the holidays, with a massive Christmas tree sparkling in the center and soft jazz music playing from hidden speakers. I checked in with the concierge, who directed me to the penthouse conference room. As the elevator climbed to the top floor, I reviewed my presentation notes one final time. I knew this material inside and out. Months of research on luxury consumer behavior, trend analysis, psychological insights into generational purchasing patterns. This wasn't just marketing strategy, it was understanding human nature and translating that into business growth. Marcus was waiting for me outside the conference room, looking sharp in a navy suit and tie. His usually calm demeanor showed cracks of nervous energy. "Thank God you made it. They're already here." Silverton flew in with his VP of Global Marketing and their creative director. "Zara, I can't stress this enough. They specifically requested you. Not the agency, not me, you." Through the glass doors of the conference room, I could see three figures in expensive suits studying documents spread across a mahogany table. My presentation materials, my research, my strategic recommendations. "What's their main concern?" I asked, slipping into work mode. "They want to know if we truly understand their brand evolution. They're moving away from traditional luxury marketing towards something more authentic, more connected to younger consumers without alienating their established base. It's a delicate balance." I nodded. This was exactly what my research had focused on: the changing landscape of luxury consumption, how millennials and Gen Z approached premium brands differently than previous generations, and how companies could bridge that gap without compromising their heritage. "I've got this," I said, and meant it. Marcus smiled. "I know you do. That's why you're here." The meeting exceeded every expectation I'd had. James Silverton himself was a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s with sharp eyes and an intensity that commanded the room. His VP, Catherine Walsh, was a brilliant woman about my age who asked pointed, insightful questions. Their creative director, Philippe Dubois, had flown in from their Paris office specifically for this meeting. For 90 minutes, I presented my analysis of luxury market trends, consumer psychology research, and strategic recommendations for their brand evolution. They listened intently, taking notes, asking follow-up questions that showed they genuinely understood and valued my insights. "This behavioral analysis," James Silverton said, pointing to one of my charts, "where did this data come from?" I conducted primary research with focus groups across three demographic segments: traditional luxury consumers, emerging affluent millennials, and Gen Z aspirational buyers. The key finding is that authenticity has become more important than exclusivity for younger consumers, but exclusivity still drives purchasing decisions for your core demographic. And your recommendation for bridging that gap? I walked them through my proposed campaign strategy, a multi-tiered approach that honored Silverton's heritage while creating new touchpoints for younger consumers. Digital storytelling that highlighted craftsmanship, influencer partnerships with creators who embodied their values rather than just follower counts, and experiential marketing that felt intimate rather than flashy. "Brilliant," Catherine Walsh murmured, studying my consumer journey mapping. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we've been looking for." By the time we finished, it was nearly 11 p.m. James Silverton stood and extended his hand to me. "Miss Mitchell, this has been one of the most insightful presentations I've seen in years. You've managed to articulate something we've been struggling to define internally: how to evolve without losing our essence." "Thank you, Mr. Silverton. Your brand has such a rich heritage. The goal is to honor that while creating new pathways for connection." He smiled. "Marcus, you've got yourself a remarkable strategist here. We'd like to move forward with the partnership, but with one condition." Marcus and I exchanged glances. "What's that?" Marcus asked. "We want Miss Mitchell to lead the strategy personally, not just develop it, but oversee implementation. This level of thinking requires continuity." My heart soared.
They weren't just buying our agency services, they specifically wanted me to spearhead their brand evolution. That can absolutely be arranged, Marcus said quickly.
Excellent. Catherine will send over the contract details Monday morning. Miss Mitchell, I hope you're prepared for a significant expansion of your role. This partnership will require international collaboration, strategic oversight across multiple markets, and direct reporting to our executive team. After they left, Marcus and I stood in the empty conference room, hardly believing what had just happened. "Do you understand what just occurred?" Marcus asked, loosening his tie. "You just landed the biggest account in our agency's history, and they want you to run it personally." "I'm still processing," I admitted, though inside I was euphoric. "Zara, this changes everything. Your salary, your title, your entire career trajectory. You're looking at a promotion to Senior Director of Strategic Development, International Travel, a team reporting to you. This is what you've been working toward." As I drove home, my mind was spinning with excitement and validation. Everything my family had dismissed as playing around with hobbies had just resulted in the most significant professional achievement of my life. I'd gone from being questioned about my career choices at Christmas dinner to being personally requested by a global CEO in the span of a few hours. But even in my triumph, I felt a pang of sadness. The people who should have been celebrating this moment with me were the same people who had spent the evening making me feel foolish for prioritizing my work. I checked my phone as I pulled into my apartment complex. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Brooke, and several text messages ranging from disappointed to angry. "Mom, I can't believe you left on Christmas Eve. We're all very hurt." Brooke, "This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior we've been talking about. When will you grow up?" Dad, "Your priorities are completely backwards, Zara. No job is worth destroying family relationships." I stared at the messages, feeling the familiar knot of guilt and frustration in my stomach. Even after the most successful night of my career, they were making me feel like I'd done something wrong. But then I thought about James Silverton's words, remarkable strategist. Catherine Walsh calling my work brilliant. Philippe Dubois asking for copies of my research to share with their European team. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let my family's disapproval diminish my achievements. I texted back to the group chat, "I'm sorry you felt hurt, but tonight was a career-defining opportunity that I couldn't pass up. I hope you can understand that someday." The responses came quickly. Brooke, "Career-defining? It was a work call on Christmas Eve. Get some perspective." Mom, "We just want you to have balance in your life, sweetheart. Work will always be there, but family moments are precious." Dad, "This obsession with work is unhealthy, Zara. You're missing out on what really matters." I turned off my phone without responding. Tomorrow, I would try to explain. Tomorrow, I would attempt to bridge the gap between their understanding and my reality. But tonight, I was going to celebrate the fact that I'd chosen to bet on myself, and it had paid off in ways I'd never imagined. What I didn't know was that Marcus had been so excited about the evening's success that he decided to drive over and share the good news in person, arriving at my parents' house just as my family was cleaning up from the dinner I had abandoned. What I didn't know was that he was about to walk through their front door with a bottle of champagne and a story that would shatter every assumption they had made about my career. What I didn't know was that everything was about to change.
Meanwhile, back at my parents' house, the aftermath of my departure had cast a dark cloud over what was supposed to be a joyful Christmas Eve celebration. My family sat around the dining room table, the remains of dinner growing cold, as they dissected my behavior with the intensity of a forensic team. "I just don't understand where we went wrong with her," Mom said, her voice heavy with disappointment, as she absently moved food around her plate. "We raised both girls the same way, but Brooke turned out so grounded, so responsible." "Don't blame yourselves," Brooke said, reaching across to pat Mom's hand. "Some people just never learn to prioritize what's important.
Zara's always been selfish, even as a kid. Remember how she'd skip family events for her art projects or writing competitions? Dad shook his head grimly. This work obsession has gotten completely out of hand. When I was building my practice, I never let clients interfere with family time. There are boundaries, principles you don't cross. The problem is, she doesn't have a real career, Nathan chimed in, cutting his ham with more force than necessary. She's just freelancing, doing projects here and there. So when someone calls, she thinks she has to jump. No job security means no confidence to set limits. Uncle Kenneth nodded sagely. Exactly. In corporate, you have structure, hierarchy, respect. People don't call executives at home on Christmas Eve. But when you're just a contractor, a freelancer, you're at everyone's beck and call. I feel sorry for her, honestly, Aunt Diana added softly. She's convinced herself that this computer work is a real career, but she's just setting herself up for disappointment. What happens when she gets older? When the technology changes? When clients get tired of her? Brooke stood up and began clearing plates with sharp, angry movements. What bothers me most is how she threw it in our faces, acting like we don't understand her important work. Please. She posts things on social media and calls it strategy. The worst part, Mom said, her voice cracking slightly, is that she's missing out on what really matters. Look around this table. Family, love, tradition. These are the moments you remember when you're old, not some work meeting that probably wasn't even as important as she made it sound. Of course it wasn't important, Dad said firmly. If it was truly urgent business, they would have scheduled it properly. The fact that they're calling her at the last minute on a holiday tells you everything you need to know about how they value her. The kids, Ivy and Owen, had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, picking up on the tension even if they didn't fully understand it. Why are everyone mad at Aunt Zara? Ivy asked, her small voice cutting through the bitter discussion. We're not mad, sweetheart. We're just sad that Aunt Zara chose work over spending Christmas Eve with her family. But isn't work important? Owen asked innocently. Work is important, Dad explained in his patient grandfather voice, but family is more important. Always. That's what grown-ups understand. There's a time for work and a time for family, and you don't mix them up. Your Aunt Zara hasn't learned that lesson yet. Maybe someday she will. As the evening wore on, their criticism grew more pointed, more personal. They dissected every aspect of my life, my apartment, my relationship with Ryan, my lack of traditional milestones like marriage and children. She's 38, Mom said, as if that explained everything. Most women her age are established, settled. They have families of their own to prioritize. That's what happens when you spend your 20s finding yourself instead of building something real. Now she's scrambling, trying to make this social media thing work because she doesn't have any other options. I worry about her future, Dad added. What's her retirement plan? Her health insurance situation? These gig economy jobs don't provide security. She's one economic downturn away from having to move back home. Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing, Mom suggested hopefully. If she lost this job, she might finally be forced to get serious about her life. Find a real position with benefits. Start thinking about settling down. She needs a wake-up call, Uncle Kenneth agreed. Something to show her that this fantasy lifestyle she's living isn't sustainable. As they talked, they painted a picture of me that was both pitying and contemptuous. A woman child who had never grown up, who was deluding herself about her career prospects, who was destined for failure and loneliness because I couldn't conform to their vision of a successful life. The sad thing is, she's actually talented, Aunt Diane said with genuine regret. If she'd applied herself to a real career, she could have been successful. But she chose the easy path, the creative path, and now she's stuck. It's not too late, Mom said, though her voice lacked conviction. If she came back to law school or went into corporate communications, she could still salvage something. She's smart enough.
She won't, though, Brooke said flatly. She's too proud to admit she was wrong. She'll keep pretending this freelance thing is working until she's 50 and alone. The conversation continued in this vein for another hour, a circular discussion that reinforced their shared belief that I was making fundamental mistakes with my life,
that my career was a house of cards that would inevitably collapse, that my choices were evidence of immaturity and poor judgment. They were so absorbed in their analysis of my failures that they almost missed the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. "Are we expecting anyone else?" Dad asked, glancing toward the front window. "Maybe it's Zara coming back," Mom said hopefully. "Maybe she realized she made a mistake." But as footsteps approached the front door, followed by a confident knock, they realized it wasn't me. The knock was too assured, too formal. Nathan went to answer the door, and the family heard him speaking to someone in the entryway. A man's voice, unfamiliar but professional. "I'm looking for the Mitchell family," the voice said. "I'm Marcus Kane, Zara's boss. I was hoping to speak with you about tonight's events." The dining room fell completely silent. Brooke's hand froze on the dish towel she'd been using. Mom's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips, and Dad straightened in his chair with the alert expression he wore in courtroom. Marcus Kane, my boss, here, at their house, on Christmas Eve. None of them had ever met anyone from my professional life. In 3 years of working at the agency, I'd never brought a colleague to a family event, never talked about my coworkers in any detail, never given them a window into my actual work environment. To them, my job existed in an abstract realm, something I did on my computer, disconnected from real people or meaningful relationships. The idea that my boss would drive to their house on Christmas Eve was so far outside their understanding that they were momentarily speechless. "What does he want?" Brooke whispered to Nathan as he returned to the dining room. "He says he needs to talk to us about Zara and what happened tonight," Nathan replied, looking confused. "He seems intense, professional. He's wearing an expensive suit." "On Christmas Eve?" Mom asked, bewildered. "Should we invite him in?" Dad wondered aloud. They looked at each other uncertainly. In their minds, I had abandoned family dinner for a frivolous work call, probably disappointing some small-time client who didn't respect boundaries. The idea that my boss would personally drive to their house on Christmas Eve suggested a level of seriousness they hadn't anticipated. "I suppose we should hear what he has to say," Dad decided, shifting into his lawyer mode. "If Zara's gotten herself into some kind of professional trouble. Or if he's here to fire her for being unreliable," Brooke added with barely concealed satisfaction. They had no idea that Marcus wasn't here to discuss my shortcomings, but to share news of the most successful night in our agency's history. They couldn't have imagined that the frivolous work call they'd been criticizing for the past 2 hours had just secured a multi-million-dollar contract that would transform my career. They were about to discover that every assumption they had made about my professional life was not just wrong, but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. As Nathan returned to the front door to invite Marcus in, the family straightened themselves, preparing to hear about my latest failure. Instead, they were about to learn the truth about who I really was and what I had actually accomplished. The reckoning was about to begin.
Marcus Kane stepped into the Mitchell family living room with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes meetings. Even on Christmas Eve, he looked impeccable. Charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt, and an air of professional authority that immediately commanded attention. The family arranged themselves awkwardly in the living room, unsure of the protocol for receiving their daughter's boss in their home. Dad gestured toward the sofa, falling back on his courtroom manners. "Please, have a seat, Mr. Kane. Can we offer you some coffees, something to drink?" "Thank you, but I can't stay long," Marcus replied, though he did settle into the armchair, coincidentally the same one I'd occupied during dinner. "I wanted to speak with you about Zara and what happened tonight." Brooke and Nathan exchanged glances. "Is she in some kind of trouble?" Mom asked, her voice tight with worry. Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Trouble? No, quite the opposite. I'm here because I wanted to share some extraordinary news about your daughter and to apologize for pulling her away from your family celebration." "Apologize," Dad repeated, his lawyer instincts picking up on the unexpected direction of the conversation. "Yes, I realize now that I may have been presumptuous asking Zara to attend such an important meeting on Christmas Eve, but the circumstances were truly exceptional, and frankly, we couldn't have succeeded without her." Uncle Kenneth leaned forward. Succeeded at what, exactly? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since arriving, he seemed to relax slightly. Perhaps I should start by introducing myself properly. I'm Marcus Kane, founder and CEO of Kane Digital Strategies. Zara is our senior digital strategist and, as of tonight, our newly promoted director of strategic development. The family absorbed this information with varying degrees of surprise. CEO, senior strategist, director. These were titles that carried weight, even in their traditional business worldview. I see, Dad said carefully. And this meeting tonight was the culmination of 6 months of work pursuing Silverton Industries as a client. They're one of the world's premier luxury brands with a global marketing budget in the tens of millions. Tonight, they signed with our agency. Mom blinked rapidly. Tens of millions? Their annual digital marketing spend alone is approximately $40 million, Marcus confirmed. This contract represents the largest account acquisition in our agency's history. It will allow us to expand internationally and triple our current revenue. The room fell completely silent. Even the children, who had been quietly playing in the corner, seemed to sense the shift in the adult conversation. And Zara was involved in this how? Brooke asked, her voice carefully neutral. Marcus's expression grew animated. Involved? She was the architect of the entire strategy. For the past 4 months, Zara has been developing a comprehensive analysis of luxury consumer behavior, generational purchasing patterns, and brand evolution strategies. Her research and insights were specifically requested by James Silverton himself. James Silverton, Aunt Diane repeated faintly, as in, yes, the founder and CEO of Silverton Industries. He flew in from London specifically for tonight's meeting. He wanted to meet the strategist behind what he called the most insightful luxury market analysis he'd seen in 20 years. Dad set down his coffee cup with a slight tremor in his hand. James Silverton personally requested to meet our daughter? Not just meet her, he insisted that she lead the account personally. Zara will be overseeing strategy implementation across multiple international markets, reporting directly to their executive team. It's an extraordinary opportunity. The family stared at each other, processing this information that completely contradicted everything they had been saying about my career for the past 2 hours. I'm sorry, but are we talking about the same Zara? Because the work she's described to us has always sounded like, well, like social media management. Marcus looked genuinely perplexed. Social media management? Zara is one of the most sophisticated strategic thinkers I've ever worked with. Her understanding of consumer psychology, market dynamics, and brand positioning is remarkable. She doesn't manage social media. She develops comprehensive digital strategies that transform how major brands connect with their audiences. But she told us she posts things online, Brooke said weakly. She creates and oversees multi-platform campaigns that generate millions in revenue for our clients. Content creation is a small component of what she does. Zara analyzes market data, develops consumer personas, creates strategic frameworks, manages multi-million-dollar advertising budgets, and provides executive-level consulting to Fortune 500 companies. Mom put her hand to her chest. Multi-million-dollar budgets? Her largest client last quarter had a $15 million advertising spend that she managed personally. The campaign exceeded performance targets by 40%, generating over $60 million in sales revenue.
The numbers hung in the air like physical objects. $60 million in sales revenue, $15 million budgets. These weren't the figures of someone playing around with hobbies. I think there's been some miscommunication, Dad said carefully, his lawyer brain trying to process this new information. We were under the impression that Zara's work was more freelance in nature, project-based. Marcus nodded understandingly. I can see how that confusion might arise. Zara is incredibly modest about her achievements, but she's a full-time senior executive at our agency with a team of junior strategists reporting to her. Her salary and bonus structure reflect her value to our organization. What kind of salary? Uncle Kenneth asked bluntly. Marcus hesitated, clearly weighing professional discretion against the need to correct their misconceptions. I can't share specific figures, but I can tell you that Zara's compensation package is well into six figures, with performance bonuses that have pushed her total earnings significantly higher. As of tonight's promotion, she'll be receiving an equity stake in the agency as well. 6 figures. Equity stake. Performance bonuses. The words seemed to physically impact my family members who had spent the evening discussing my lack of financial security and professional stability. "But she lives in that small apartment downtown," Brooke said, as if trying to reconcile this new information with her existing beliefs. "By choice," Marcus replied. "Zara values location and lifestyle over space. Her apartment is in the Arts District, walking distance from our office and the creative community she's part of. It's a conscious decision, not a financial limitation." "And the work she does, is it respected in your industry?" Marcus's laugh was warm and genuine. "Respected?" Zara presented at the International Digital Marketing Conference last month. Her research on generational luxury consumption patterns has been cited in 3 major industry publications. She's been headhunted by agencies in New York and London multiple times. I have to work constantly to retain her because everyone in our industry knows her value. The family exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Conferences, publications, headhunting. These were markers of professional success they understood and respected. "Why didn't she tell us any of this?" Mom asked, her voice small. Marcus paused, clearly considering his words carefully. "I think Zara has felt that her family doesn't quite understand or value her work. She's mentioned feeling judged for her career choices, for not following a more traditional path." "We just wanted her to be stable," Dad said defensively. "Secure." "She is stable. She's building something remarkable in an industry that didn't exist 20 years ago. The work she does is shaping how major brands communicate with consumers in the digital age. It's pioneering work, and she's exceptional at it." Brooke looked stricken. We assumed she was struggling, that her work wasn't serious." "On the contrary, her work is so serious that the CEO of a billion-dollar company flew across the Atlantic Ocean to meet with her personally. Tonight's success will likely establish Zara as one of the leading strategic voices in luxury brand marketing." Uncle Kenneth cleared his throat awkwardly. "When you say leading voice, I mean she'll be speaking at conferences, consulting for major brands, potentially writing a book about her research. The Silverton partnership will raise her profile significantly in the industry." The room fell silent again as the full weight of Marcus's words sank in. Everything they thought they knew about my life, my career, my future, all of it was wrong. Not just slightly off, but completely, fundamentally incorrect. "I should go," Marcus said, standing up. "I just wanted to make sure you understood why tonight was so important, and to thank you for raising such an exceptional daughter. Zara is not just talented, she's ethical, innovative, and incredibly hardworking. You should be very proud of her." As he moved toward the door, he paused and turned back to the family. "Oh, and one more thing. The reason I was able to come here tonight is because Zara insisted on driving separately to the meeting because she told me she wanted to return to spend Christmas morning with her family, despite having every reason to celebrate professionally. Even after landing the biggest client of her career, her first thought was coming back to you." With that, Marcus left my family alone with the wreckage of every assumption they had made about my life. The woman they'd pitied was actually wildly successful. The career they'd dismissed was actually groundbreaking.
The choices they'd criticize were actually strategic and thoughtful, and the selfish decision to leave Christmas dinner was actually the most important professional moment of my life. They sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that they didn't know me at all.
The silence that followed Marcus's departure was deafening. My family sat frozen in their living room, each processing the devastating revelation that everything they believed about my life was not just wrong, but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. Dad was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. 6 figures. She's making 6 figures, and we've been treating her like she's unemployed. More than 6 figures, Nathan corrected quietly, still staring at the spot where Marcus had been sitting. He said her bonuses push her significantly higher, and now she has equity in the company. Mom covered her face with her hands. Oh my God, what have we done? We've been complete idiots, Brooke said flatly, her usual composure cracking. For 3 years, we've been patronizing her, pitying her, acting like she was some kind of failure. And she struggled to find words. She's been building an empire. Uncle Kenneth shook his head slowly. James Silverton. I've read about him in Forbes. He's worth billions. And he flew from London to meet our Zara. Not our Zara. That's the problem. We don't know Zara at all. We've been seeing what we expected to see instead of what was actually there. Dad stood up abruptly, beginning to pace. International conferences, industry publications, headhunted by agencies in New York and London. She's not just successful, she's renowned in her field. And we called it playing around with hobbies, Mom whispered, her voice breaking. We called her work hobbies. Brooke was staring at her hands, her perfect manicure suddenly seeming trivial. I said she posted pictures for a living? I actually said that. To her face, multiple times. We all did, Nathan admitted. We reduced everything she accomplished to social media management and computer work. The weight of their collective dismissal was settling on them like a heavy blanket. For years, they had systematically minimized my achievements, questioned my choices, and made me feel like a disappointment. Now they were learning that during all those family gatherings where they had pitied my unstable career, I had been building something extraordinary. Remember last Christmas? Mom said suddenly, when she tried to explain that campaign she was working on and we all just nodded politely and changed the subject? The sustainable fashion brand, Dad recalled, his face pale. She said it was a major project and we acted like she was talking about a scrapbooking project. That was probably a multi-million-dollar campaign, Brooke realized with growing horror. And we treated it like she was talking about a scrapbooking project. Uncle Kenneth pulled out his phone. I'm looking up Kane Digital Strategies right now. His face grew more ashen as he read. They're not some small startup. They're a major agency, award-winning. Their client list includes, he paused reading, Fortune 500 companies, international brands, government organizations. This isn't some little freelance operation. This is a significant business. How did we get it so wrong? Aunt Diane asked plaintively. How did we not know? Because we never asked, Dad said, his lawyer's analytical mind kicking in. We never asked real questions about her work. We made assumptions based on, what? The fact that she works on computers? The fact that her career didn't look like ours? Brooke was scrolling through her phone now. I'm looking at the Silverton Industries website. Their marketing budget is massive. If they signed with Sarah's agency tonight, that's not just big, that's enormous. Career-defining enormous. And she left our dinner to close that deal, Nathan said quietly, while we sat here calling her selfish and irresponsible. The irony was crushing. They had spent hours criticizing me for prioritizing work over family, never realizing that the work they were dismissing was the most significant professional achievement of my career. What kind of person must she think we are? Mom asked, tears starting to flow. Her own family, and we've been sabotaging her confidence for years. Not sabotaging, Dad corrected grimly. Destroying. We have been systematically destroying her confidence in her own success. Brooke was looking up from her phone, her face stricken.
I found an article about the International Digital Marketing Conference. Zara was a keynote speaker. There's a photo of her presenting to hundreds of people. The caption calls her a rising star in strategic digital marketing and an innovative voice in consumer psychology. She held up my phone, showing a professional photo of me on stage, confident and poised, addressing a room full of professionals. It was a version of me they had never seen, the successful, respected professional I was in my actual life, as opposed to the struggling disappointment they had imagined. She looks so confident, Mom said softly, studying the photo. So professional, so accomplished. Because she is accomplished, Aunt Diane said. We just never bothered to see it. The conversation continued as they unearthed more evidence of my success. Nathan found articles citing my research. Uncle Kenneth discovered that Kane Digital Strategies had been named Agency of the Year twice in the past 3 years.
Brooke found my LinkedIn profile, which listed achievements and recognitions they had never known existed. "Look at this," Brooke said, reading from her phone. "Developed integrated marketing strategy that increased client revenue by 300% over 18 months. 300%! Here's another one," Nathan added. "Led cross-cultural marketing initiative across 12 international markets." 12 international markets! She's been working globally. With each discovery, their shame deepened. I hadn't just been successful. I had been extraordinarily successful, in ways they had never imagined. And throughout it all, I had endured their criticism, their suggestions that I get serious about my career, their implications that my work was trivial. "No wonder she never talks about her job in detail," Dad said heavily. "Every time she tried, we made it clear we didn't think it was important." "Remember when she mentioned working weekends?" Mom asked. "We lectured her about work-life balance. She was probably closing million-dollar deals." "And when she said she was traveling for work," Brooke added, "we acted like it was an indulgence. She was probably speaking at conferences or meeting with international clients." The full scope of their misunderstanding was becoming clear. Every aspect of my professional life that they had criticized or dismissed was actually evidence of my success and dedication. The late nights they had worried about were me exceeding client expectations. The travel they had questioned was me building an international reputation. The work calls that interrupted family time were opportunities that most people in my industry would kill for. "What are we going to do?" Mom asked helplessly. "How do we fix this?" "I don't know if we can," Dad said honestly. "We've spent years making her feel like her choices were wrong. Her work was unimportant. Her success was imaginary. How do you apologize for that level of blindness?" "Blindness isn't the right word," Nathan said quietly. "Blindness implies we couldn't see. We chose not to see. We decided her work wasn't worth understanding, so we didn't try to understand it." Brooke was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with unusual vulnerability. "I think I was jealous. She was doing something creative, something she was passionate about, and I convinced myself it couldn't be real success because it wasn't traditional success. It was easier to dismiss her choices than to admire her courage." "We all were," Uncle Kenneth admitted. "She took risks, followed her passion, built something from nothing. Instead of being proud of her, we kept waiting for her to fail so we could say we were right. And she didn't fail. She succeeded beyond anything we could have imagined. While we were worrying about her stability, she was building a career that most people would envy." As the evening wore on, they continued to research my career, finding evidence of achievements they had never known about, recognition they had never celebrated, opportunities they had never understood. Each discovery was another weight on their collective conscience. The worst part was realizing how I must have felt during all those family gatherings, accomplished and confident in my professional life, but made to feel small and unsuccessful by the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally. "She's probably at home right now," Mom said, "celebrating the biggest night of her career completely alone because her own family made her feel guilty for pursuing it." "No," Dad corrected quietly. "According to her boss, she's planning to come back tomorrow morning to spend Christmas with us. Even after everything we said tonight, even after we made her feel terrible for leaving, she still wants to be with her family." The generosity of that gesture, given how they treated me, was almost too much to bear. "We don't deserve her," Brooke said simply. "No," Dad agreed. "We don't. but maybe we can learn to." They spent the rest of the evening planning how to apologize, how to make amends for years of misunderstanding and criticism. But in the back of their minds, they all wondered the same thing. Was it too late to repair the damage they had done? Had they pushed away their successful, accomplished daughter for so long that she might never trust them with her true self again? Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight brought only the painful recognition of how badly they had failed me, and how much they had missed by refusing to see who I really was. Christmas morning arrived with a bitter irony that wasn't lost on anyone in the Mitchell household. The day that was supposed to celebrate love, family, and joy had become a reckoning with years of judgment and misunderstanding. I woke up in my apartment feeling emotionally drained, but professionally exhilarated. The Silverton deal was still sinking in. The promotion, the equity stake, the international opportunities that lay ahead. But alongside the triumph was a deep sadness about my family's reaction the night before. Ryan had stayed over, and as we made coffee in my small kitchen, I told him about both the incredible meeting and the painful text from my family afterward. "You know you don't have to go back there today," he said, gently wrapping his arms around me from behind. "You could skip Christmas morning. Take some time to process everything." "I thought about it," I admitted, leaning back against his chest. "But I keep thinking about what Marcus said during the meeting, about building bridges instead of walls. Maybe it's time to try one more time." "Even after they made you feel guilty for the biggest night of your career?" I turned to face him. "Especially then. I spent years hiding my success from them because I was afraid of their judgment. Maybe it's time to stop hiding." An hour later, I was driving back to my childhood home, a box of presents in my backseat, and Marcus's words from the previous night echoing in my mind. "You're remarkable, Zara. Don't let anyone make you forget that." When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the house looked different somehow. The holiday decorations seemed less perfect, more subdued. Through the front window, I could see my family gathered in the living room, but their usual Christmas morning energy was notably absent. Mom answered the door before I could knock. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked like she hadn't slept. "Zara," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "thank God you came." Something in her tone made me pause. This wasn't the disappointed lecture I had expected about prioritizing work over family. This was something else entirely. "Is everything okay?" I asked, stepping into the entryway. Instead of answering, she just pulled me into a hug that was tighter and more desperate than any embrace she'd given me in years. In the living room, the scene was unlike any Christmas morning I remembered. The family was gathered around the coffee table, but instead of opening presents, they were looking at laptops and phones. As I entered, they all looked up with expressions I'd never seen before: shame, regret, and something that looked like awe. "Zara," Dad said, standing up slowly, "we need to talk." "If this is about last night," I began, but Brooke cut me off. "Your boss came here," she said quietly. "Marcus Kane. After you left." My heart stopped. "He what?" "He wanted to apologize for pulling you away from Christmas dinner and to tell us about the meeting." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What did he tell you?" "Everything," Mom said softly. "The Silverton contract, your promotion, the international expansion, how they specifically requested you by name." Dad stepped forward, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished. "Zara, we had no idea about any of it, about who you really are, what you've actually accomplished." I looked around at their faces, seeing genuine shock and remorse. "You had no idea because you never asked. You never wanted to know." "You're right," Brooke said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We made assumptions, terrible assumptions, and we were completely, horribly wrong." Uncle Kenneth gestured to his laptop. "We've been researching your work all night. The conferences, the publications, the clients. Zara, you're not just successful, you're a leader in your industry." "I tried to tell you," I said, feeling years of frustration bubbling up. "I tried so many times to explain what I do, and you all just dismissed it, made me feel like I was deluding myself." "We know," Aunt Diane said, tears in her eyes.
We were so wrong, so completely, inexcusably wrong. Mom pulled out her phone with trembling hands. I found this article about you speaking at that conference in London. You look so confident, so professional. And I realized I've never seen you look like that around us. We've never made you feel proud of who you are. The photo she showed me was from the International Digital Marketing Summit, where I delivered a keynote on the future of luxury brand positioning. I remembered that day clearly. The standing ovation, the business cards pressed into my hands afterward, the validation of knowing I belonged among the industry's best. You want to know why I never look like that around you? I asked, my voice growing stronger. Because every time I tried to share my successes, you found ways to diminish them. Every achievement became a concern about my stability. Every opportunity became a lecture about work-life balance. You're absolutely right, Dad said, his lawyer's training making him face facts head-on. We've been systematically undermining your confidence for years, making you question your own success.
Brooke looked up from her phone, where she'd been reading about Kane Digital Strategies. Zara, your agency manages accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You personally oversee budgets bigger than Nathan's entire department's annual revenue. But you told me I post pictures for a living, I replied, the hurt still fresh. I know, she said, starting to cry. I know, and I'm so sorry. I was jealous, I think. Jealous that you had the courage to build something from nothing, to follow your passion. It was easier to convince myself you were failing than to admit you were succeeding in ways I never could. Nathan cleared his throat awkwardly. When I made that joke about Instagramming your way to retirement, you were probably managing campaigns that generate more revenue in a month than I make in a year. More than you make in 5 years, I corrected quietly. The number hung in the air like a slap. Uncle Kenneth whistled low. Jesus, Sarah, we really had no idea. Because you never wanted to have any idea, I said. You decided that because my career didn't look like yours, it must not be real. You never asked for details, never tried to understand, never celebrated a single achievement. Mom was crying openly now. We failed you. As parents, as family, we completely failed you. Do you know what it's like, I asked, my voice shaking, to have the biggest night of your professional life and then come home to texts telling you you're selfish and irresponsible? To land a deal that will change your entire career trajectory and have your own family make you feel guilty about it? No, Dad said simply, but we're starting to understand how much damage we've done. I looked around the room at their stricken faces, feeling a complex mix of vindication and sadness. This was what I'd wanted for years: recognition, understanding, validation of my choices. But it had come at such a cost. Last night, I said slowly, James Silverton told me that my strategic thinking was visionary. He said I understood luxury consumer psychology better than consultants with decades more experience. He offered me opportunities that could establish me as one of the leading voices in international marketing. And you came home to us telling you to get your priorities straight, Brooke said, her voice hollow with shame. While you were closing the deal of a lifetime, Nathan added, we were sitting here talking about how you needed to grow up and get a real job. The juxtaposition was stark and painful. While industry leaders were recognizing my expertise and offering me career-defining opportunities, my own family was discussing my perceived failures and immaturity. Marcus said something else, Dad continued quietly. He said that despite everything, despite landing the biggest client of your career, your first thought was coming back to spend Christmas morning with us. That even after we made you feel terrible, you still wanted to be with your family. I nodded, feeling the sting of tears. Because despite everything, you're still my family. I still wanted you to be proud of me. We are proud of you, Mom said urgently. We're so incredibly proud.
we didn't know how to show it because we didn't understand what we should be proud of. You should have been proud that I took risks, that I built something meaningful, that I found work I'm passionate about and excelled at it, that I helped businesses grow and created campaigns that reached millions of people, that I earned respect in a competitive industry through talent and hard work. We should have been proud that you were brave enough to create your own path, instead of forcing you to justify it constantly. Aunt Diane spoke up softly. We thought we were protecting you, warning you about instability, encouraging you to choose security. We didn't realize you'd already chosen something better than security. You'd chosen excellence. And now? I asked, my voice shaking. What happens now? Dad straightened, and for the first time in the conversation, he looked like the confident man I'd grown up with. Now, we learn. We ask real questions about your work, celebrate your achievements instead of questioning them. We support your choices instead of undermining them. We stop treating you like you're lost and start recognizing that you found exactly what you are meant to do. Mom added, we start being the family you deserve. Brooke said simply. I looked around at their faces, seeing genuine remorse and commitment to change. It wasn't going to erase years of hurt overnight, but it was a beginning. Last night, I said slowly, the Silverton deal isn't just big for the agency. It's going to change my life significantly. International travel, consulting opportunities, possibly relocating to London for part of the year. Instead of concern or criticism, I saw excitement in their eyes. That's incredible, sweetheart, Mom said. Tell us everything. We want to understand this time, really understand. For the first time in years, I felt like I could share my professional life with my family without fear of judgment or dismissal. The conversation that followed was different than any we'd ever had. They asked detailed questions about my work, listened without interrupting, and expressed genuine amazement at what I had accomplished. It was the Christmas morning I'd always wanted. My family finally seeing me for who I really was.
The weeks following that Christmas morning marked a complete transformation in my relationship with my family. It wasn't immediate. Years of hurt and misunderstanding don't heal overnight, but for the first time since I'd started my career, I felt like they were genuinely trying to understand my world. Mom was the first to make a concrete gesture. 3 days after Christmas, she called me at work. Zara, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, she began, and I could hear the new carefulness in her voice, the awareness that my work time was valuable. It's fine, Mom. What's up? I've been reading about digital marketing, she said, and I nearly dropped my phone. I found some articles about your agency and about the Silverton account. I wanted to understand what you do, really understand it. For the next hour, she asked thoughtful questions about campaign strategy, consumer psychology, and brand positioning. She didn't pretend to grasp everything, but her effort to learn was more meaningful than any apology. I'm proud of you, she said at the end of the call, not just for your success, but for your patience with us, for not giving up on us even when we gave up on understanding you. Dad's approach was characteristically methodical. He scheduled what he called a professional consultation lunch, where he asked me to explain my career trajectory as if he were considering a similar path. Over 2 hours at his favorite downtown restaurant, I walked him through my education, my early career decisions, my transition to digital marketing, and my strategic thinking about industry trends. In law, we talk about building a case, he said as we finished our meal. What you've done is build a case for yourself in an emerging field. You identified opportunities, developed expertise, and established credibility. It's brilliant business strategy. Coming from my traditionally minded father, this analysis felt like the professional validation I'd been craving for years. Brooke's transformation was perhaps the most surprising. A week after Christmas, she invited me to lunch. Not a family obligation, but a sister-to-sister conversation. I need to ask you something, she said after we'd ordered. Are you happy? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, Setting aside the success and the money and the recognition, do you love what you do? Does it fulfill you? I thought about my daily work, the creative challenges, the thrill of developing strategies that actually worked, the satisfaction of helping brands connect with their audiences. Yes, I said simply. I love it. She nodded slowly. I envied that. I've been thinking about it for weeks. I'm successful by every traditional measure, but I'm not happy. I chose security over passion, and watching you choose differently and succeed at it made me question everything. You could make changes, I suggested carefully. Maybe, but first I want to understand what I was so threatened by. Would you would you show me what you actually do? Like, walk me through a real campaign. That afternoon, I took Brooke to my office for the first time. I showed her our workspace, introduced her to my team, and walked her through the Silverton campaign development from initial research to final presentation. She was quiet for most of the tour, absorbing the bustling creative energy, the sophisticated technology, the obvious professionalism of the operation. This isn't what I pictured, she admitted as we sat in the conference room where I'd first presented the luxury market analysis that caught Silverton's attention. What did you picture? I don't know, something smaller, more casual. People in hoodies playing around on laptops. She gestured around the room, glass walls, high-end equipment, teams collaborating on complex projects. This is serious business. It always was, I said gently. You just weren't ready to see it. The most meaningful change came from my extended family. Uncle Kenneth, who had always been the most vocal critic of my unstable career, called me in early January with an unexpected request. Zara, my company is looking at updating our marketing approach. We've been doing the same thing for 20 years, and our competitors are eating our lunch online. Would you be willing to consult with us? I was stunned. You want to hire me? I want to hire the expert, he corrected, which happens to be my niece, but if you take this on, it's purely professional. We'll pay your full rate. Working with Uncle Kenneth's manufacturing company became a fascinating challenge. They made industrial equipment, about as far from luxury brands as possible, but the principles of strategic marketing applied across industries. I developed a B2B digital strategy that positioned them as innovation leaders rather than just equipment suppliers. 6 months later, their online lead generation had increased by 400%, and they'd landed 3 major contracts directly attributed to the digital campaigns I developed. I owe you an apology that goes beyond family, Uncle Kenneth told me when we celebrated the campaign's success. I questioned your career because I didn't understand it, but you've revolutionized our business. You're not just successful, you're genuinely brilliant at what you do.
The Silverton partnership, meanwhile, was exceeding every expectation. My consumer psychology research became the foundation for their global rebrand. And James Silverton personally recommended me to 2 other luxury conglomerates. By spring, I was managing accounts across 3 continents and had been featured on the cover of Digital Marketing Today magazine. The article, titled The Psychology of Luxury, How Zara Mitchell is Reshaping High-End Brand Strategy, became the most read piece in the magazine's history. Mom framed it and hung it in her kitchen, right next to Brooke's college graduation photo and the kids' school pictures. That small gesture meant more to me than any professional accolade. The real test of my family's transformation came when I announced that Silverton had offered me a position heading their global digital strategy from their London headquarters. It was the kind of opportunity that could establish me as one of the leading voices in international marketing. But it meant moving across the ocean. I expected concern, maybe resistance, certainly questions about whether I was making the right choice. Instead, Dad said, "That's incredible, sweetheart. What an honor that they want you to lead their global strategy." Mom asked practical questions about timing and logistics, but framed them as support rather than obstacles. "What can we do to help you prepare? Do you need help with the move?" Brooke was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I'm going to miss you terribly, but this is amazing. You're going to conquer London the same way you conquered everything else."
6 months later, I was settling into my new life in London, leading a team of international strategists and working directly with luxury brands across Europe and Asia. The scared girl who had sat at that Christmas dinner table feeling like a failure was now addressing executive boards and speaking at conferences on 3 continents. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in my relationship with my family. We video called weekly, and instead of polite small talk, they asked substantive questions about my work. They celebrated my professional victories with genuine enthusiasm. They sent me articles about digital marketing trends they thought I'd find interesting. For my birthday, instead of generic gifts that showed they didn't really know me, I received thoughtful presents that reflected my actual interests in achievements. A vintage book on consumer psychology from Dad, a sophisticated leather portfolio from Mom, and from Brooke, a beautiful piece of art for my London apartment with a note that read, "For someone who's always known exactly who she was, even when the rest of us were too blind to see it." When I flew home for Christmas that year, exactly 1 year after the dinner that had changed everything, the contrast was remarkable. Instead of dreading family gatherings, I looked forward to them. Instead of hiding my achievements, I shared them openly. Instead of feeling like I had to justify my choices, I felt supported and celebrated. As we sat around the same dining room table where I'd once felt so small and misunderstood, Dad raised his wine glass. "To Zara," he said, "who had the courage to build the life she wanted and the grace to forgive us for taking so long to appreciate it." "To family," I replied, "who learned that love sometimes means expanding your definition of success." The woman who had once hidden her achievements to avoid criticism was now sharing them freely with people who had learned to celebrate rather than diminish them. It had taken a crisis and a boss willing to drive across town on Christmas Eve to open their eyes to who I really was. But sometimes the most important transformations happen when people finally decide to see you clearly.
2 years later, I stood in the conference room of Silverton Industries' London headquarters, looking out at the Thames as I prepared for what would be the most important presentation of my career. The Global Luxury Market Summit was being held virtually, with CEOs and marketing directors from 50 countries joining to hear my research on post-pandemic consumer behavior in the luxury sector. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Good luck today, sweetheart. We'll all be watching the live stream. So proud of you." The fact that my family was not only aware of my professional milestones, but actively following them, still felt surreal sometimes. The contrast with that Christmas dinner 3 years ago couldn't have been more stark. As I adjusted my presentation slides one final time, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The Silverton partnership had indeed transformed everything. Not just my career, but my relationship with my family, and most importantly, my relationship with myself. The presentation went flawlessly. For 90 minutes, I guided industry leaders through my research on how luxury consumption patterns had evolved, how digital native generations approached premium brands, and what strategies would drive growth in an increasingly complex global market. The questions afterward were sophisticated, engaged, and respectful, a far cry from the dismissive responses I used to receive at family gatherings. After the session ended, James Silverton himself joined the call privately. "Zara, that was exceptional work," he said. "I have a proposition for you. We're considering launching a consulting division focused on luxury brand psychology. Would you be interested in heading it up? It would mean complete autonomy, your own team, and the opportunity to work with brands across all sectors." The offer was everything I dreamed of, the chance to build something from the ground up, to establish myself as the leading voice in luxury consumer psychology, to create a legacy in the industry I loved. "I'm honored by the offer," I replied. "Can I have some time to consider it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." After the call ended, I sat in my London office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows and shelves lined with industry awards, and thought about the girl who had once been made to feel worthless for pursuing her passion. That evening, I called my family to share the news. "A consulting division?" Dad repeated, his voice filled with the kind of professional respect I'd once craved. "Zara, that's like being offered a partnership at a major firm.
They're essentially asking you to build your own company within their company. What does that mean for you? Mom asked, her question practical but supportive. It means complete creative control, international scope, and the opportunity to work with the world's most prestigious brands. It's everything I've been working toward. Then you have to say yes, Brooke said without hesitation. This is your moment to build something legendary. Their unanimous support still amazed me. These were the same people who had once questioned whether my work was sustainable, who worried about my financial security, who had suggested I consider more traditional career paths. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy. There had been awkward conversations, hurt feelings to work through, and new patterns of communication to establish. But gradually, they had learned to see my success for what it was, and I had learned to trust them with my professional victories as well as my personal struggles. The consulting division launched 6 months later. Within a year, we had worked with luxury brands in 30 countries, developed marketing strategies that generated over $2 billion in revenue, and established new industry standards for ethical luxury marketing. I was invited to speak at conferences on 6 continents, my research was cited in academic journals, and Forbes named me one of the 30 under 40 leaders reshaping global business. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Uncle Kenneth, whose manufacturing company I had helped transform, nominated me for the Regional Business Innovation Award. His nomination letter, which I only learned about when I won, included this line: Zara Mitchell represents the future of business. Creative, strategic, globally minded, and unafraid to challenge conventional thinking. She has the rare combination of analytical brilliance and intuitive understanding of human behavior that makes her insights invaluable to any organization lucky enough to work with her. Reading those words from a man who had once dismissed my career as playing around on computers brought tears to my eyes. The award ceremony was held in my hometown, and my entire family attended. As I accepted the recognition, I looked out at the audience and saw Mom dabbing her eyes with a tissue, Dad sitting straighter with pride, and Brooke applauding enthusiastically. Uncle Kenneth gave me a thumbs up from the front row. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of supporting unconventional paths, of recognizing that success comes in many forms, and of the power of believing in someone's potential even when you don't understand their methods.
3 years ago, I said, looking directly at my family, I was told that my career choice was worthless, that I was wasting my talents on something that wasn't real work. Today, I want to say thank you to the people who learned to see past their preconceptions, who expanded their definition of success, and who reminded me that family love can grow and change, just like careers can. The standing ovation that followed felt like vindication not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed for choosing a non-traditional path. After the ceremony, we gathered at my parents' house for a celebration dinner. The same dining room where I had once felt so small and misunderstood was now filled with congratulations, detailed questions about my future plans, and genuine pride in my achievements. You know what I keep thinking about? Brick said as we shared dessert. That Christmas, when you left for the Silverton meeting, we all thought you were being irresponsible, choosing work over family. And instead, she was choosing her future, Nathan added, making the decision that led to everything that came after. I was terrified that night, not just about the meeting, but about disappointing you all. Again, you could never disappoint us, Mom said firmly. We just didn't know how to show you that we were proud of who you were becoming. The problem was, we were trying to fit you into our definition of success instead of learning what success meant to you, Dad reflected. We measured everything by traditional metrics: salary, job titles, conventional milestones. We couldn't see that you were creating something entirely new. As the evening wound down, I found myself in the kitchen with Brooke, washing dishes just like we had as children. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. Watching you build your career gave me the courage to make changes in my own life. I started therapy, I left Nathan, we're getting divorced, and I'm going back to school for my master's degree in counseling. I turned to look at her, surprised. Brooke, I had no idea. I realized I'd spent so much time criticizing your unconventional choices because I was too scared to make my own. You showed me that it's never too late to choose authenticity over security. How are you feeling about it all? She smiled, and for the first time in years, it looked genuine and unguarded.
terrified, excited, alive. Kind of like how you must have felt when you started your agency. Exactly like that, I confirmed. Later that evening, as I prepared to fly back to London, Dad pulled me aside. He said, I want you to know that watching you succeed on your own terms has changed how I think about success entirely. You didn't just build a career, you built a philosophy. You proved that passion and purpose can be just as valuable as security and tradition. Thank you for learning to see it that way, I replied. Thank you for not giving up on us while we figured it out. On the plane back to London, I opened my laptop and began writing what would become my first book, The Psychology of Success: Why Following Your Passion is the Ultimate Strategic Decision. It was part business strategy, part personal memoir, part guide for anyone who had ever been told their dreams weren't practical enough. The book became a bestseller, was translated into 12 languages, and established me as a thought leader not just in marketing, but in career development and personal fulfillment. But more than any professional achievement, what meant the most was the inscription I wrote in the copy I gave to my family. To the people who learned that love sometimes means changing your mind about what's possible. 3 years after being called worthless at a Christmas dinner, I had built an international consulting firm, authored a best-selling book, and been recognized as one of the most innovative voices in global business. But the greatest transformation wasn't in my career. It was in discovering that the people who love you can learn to see you clearly if you're brave enough to keep showing them who you really are. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal the truth. Sometimes it takes a boss walking through the door with evidence of your worth. Sometimes it takes years of patient rebuilding. But the most profound changes happen when people decide to expand their understanding of what success can look like, and when families learn that support means celebrating who someone is, not who you think they should be. That Christmas dinner had ended with me feeling worthless and alone. 3 years later, I felt valued, understood, and surrounded by people who had learned to see my unconventional path as a strength rather than a failure. It had taken courage to bet on myself when no one else would. It had taken even more courage to let them back in when they finally decided to believe in me, too. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.